Welcome back to the Security Unhappy Hour, where we bring together a group of security professionals and naturally cheery folks to discuss topics in the cybersecurity community, share knowledge, learn, teach, and exchange ideas. Before we get started, it's important to point out that the views and opinions expressed on the Security Unhappy Hour and related websites are those of the hosts, guests, and authors, and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any one company. In this episode, Lisa Bradley, Katie Noble, Crob, and I are going to talk about the CVE program, what it is and how it has changed and how it works. And kicking us off with that is going to be me. Katie, can you tell us a little bit more about the CVE program? I think there's probably some people in the audience that really are not familiar with it.
Yeah, so the CVE program has existed in some form since 1999. So actually,
a party like that, 1999.
Yeah. In 2019, we celebrated the 20th anniversary party. So the program was old enough to vote. We were super excited about it. 2021, we were supposed to have a rip-roaring party at Black Hat because it was finally old enough to drink. Did not happen. So the CVE program, what it is years and years ago, back in the 90s, we started having all these different standards for talking about vulnerabilities. And what eventually came up was maybe we should have one standard. And so the CVE program was born out of that. So the CVE program is hosted by the MITRE Corporation. MITRE doesn't own it, MITRE just hosts it. And what the CVE program does is it is a community-based effort. It's made up of 161 CVE naming authorities and the MITRE Corporation. And they identify and catalog vulnerabilities. So usually to kind of explain what that is I'll explain that a CVE record is I like to think of it like a dictionary definition, right? It's a tag that identifies a specific vulnerability. So if we're looking at a product and there may be multiple kinds of vulnerabilities in that product, it lets you and I know that we're talking about that one, not that one or that one, right? So that's what it is. It provides a unique identifier to a specific vulnerability within a product so that we can have a conversation about it.
So Katie, can I interrupt you real quick? You said two acronyms so far. So we've been saying CVE, but we didn't really say what CVE is, and CNA. So can you explain and enumerate it out for us?
Yeah. So CVE is nothing. So it used to be an acronym, but it is no longer an acronym. It is kind of like NPR or CVS or KFC. I know.
I didn't know that.
This is a recent thing.
Whoa! Yeah. What was it?
It was the Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures Program. And several people, including myself, on the CVE board got real tired of explaining that it was not the Common Vulnerability Enumeration Program. It was the Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures Program. And when I would have to go talk to Congress about it, I would have to explain what an exposure was and then say, we haven't actually cataloged exposures in about 15 years. And then they would say, why is it in your name? And we would say, and so this past year, a vote was taken and a survey was done. It was a very unscientific survey where we asked the community for feedback on the name. And what we have done is essentially taken that feedback, and it's not an official thing. It's just kind of what is it called? We're just de-emphasizing and referring to it only as the acronym. So the CVE program is just the CVE program.
I sort of like it because then I won't have to remember what the E stands for because I used to screw it up all the time myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Every conversation that I would walk into whenever I was talking about the CVE program, I have to explain what the CVE that it was not enumeration. And for a long time, as the government sponsor of the CVE program, it was my job. I would still call it the Common Vulnerability and Enumeration Program because it just slipped out. So the other acronym that you asked about was the CNAs. So CNAs are CVE naming authorities. And so an organization can become a CNA by signing up with MITRE. With the CVE program, they go through some training and then they are blessed into the CVE program as a CVE naming authority, meaning they can issue CVEs directly within the scope of their program.
Great. I'll tell you, my company's a CNA, and I really appreciate it. We get like a block of CVEs, and then I could sign them out as appropriate and when appropriate. And I liked it because in the past, I would have to try to get one at a time or two or three at a time, and it was a lot more work. And then I would have to sort of explain what the issue was for me to get it. And not like I don't trust MITRE by any means, but I'm not comfortable always with trying to predisclose what my issue is. So when I'm a numbering authority, I can just get that block and then assign it out as needed. So I'm really happy about that program.
Yep, it's a cool program. It's really nice. And I think at this point, 68% of all CVE records are created by CVE naming authorities, which is really, really good. The idea is that the CVE program is community-driven program, it's community-based program. And so it's really great to see the community actually being the main driving factor behind issuing of the CVE IDs.
So how many CNAs are there? You said 100 and...
I think we're actually up to 167, but my last official count was 161.
Great. Yeah, and I know there's more and more like all the time. So, okay, Crob, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just knew we said the number.
I was going to ask, I love all things community. Could I be a CNA, Katie?
So there are some rules about who can and cannot be a CNA.
I don't like rules though.
Yeah, so there has been instances in the past where individuals have wanted to be CNAs, and in the beginning, in the effort, the community program, the CVE program did some experimenting with that, and what we found is that it's a lot of work, and really you have to have a certain amount of commitment that's behind it. So the CVE program really doesn't want individuals to be CNAs. What they're looking for are product vendors to be CNAs, or there's a couple other kinds of CNAs too. There's research organizations or national certs. It's an organization that has the resources to be able to commit to doing the work.
So Katie, as me, I have a question. I'm sorry. As me as a CNA, am I able to assign CVEs to others that aren't CNAs in behalf of like MITRE? How does that work?
No. So you can only assign CVEs within the scope of your program. So now that's the interesting part. It's the scope of your program, right? So if as a research organization, say, I don't know, Google Project Zero, if there is not a vendor CNA to cover a product and they find a vulnerability, as a CNA, they can issue a CVE in that. But they can't.
Okay, got it.
So there's something called the right of first refusal, which means if one vendor finds a vulnerability in another vendor CNA's products, they're supposed to hand that over. Now, there are some weird intricacies in that, but that's why you have the CVE program in the middle to kind of run interference between. Josh, you had a question?
My only question was, how much work is it for a CNA? What is the work that goes into being a CNA?
There's a lot of work that goes into being a CNA. So you have to do a lot of deconfliction. The CNAs are the ones that write the product descriptions. They have to upload requests. And so we're moving away from block reservations to basically on-call reservations. So you request a CVE ID, you issue the CVE ID immediately. You no longer get a block of numbers that you can pull from, but it is becoming more automated. So there's some automated services that are coming online later this year that will make it kind of a real time. So there is a lot of work that goes into being a CNA, but the CVE program has put a lot of time and effort into streamlining the process so that it is not nearly as burdensome as it used to be. These days, it is things like writing the description, outlining what the vulnerability actually is, and then and that work it's really beneficial for the CNA to actually do that, because then we can guarantee that that information is correct. You have a much higher chance of that information being accurate if the vendor, the person who actually owns and works that product every day, is the one that that writes that product description. So there's very little questioning involved in it. So there is a good bit of work in it, but it's not nearly as burdensome as it used to be.
we're having to write descriptions anyways. We're just,
Correct.
you know,
exactly.
trying to make sure that we answer all MITRE's information that they want in a description to it. Go ahead, Crob.
If I find a vulnerability that gets a CVE, do I have to assign some type of score, like a CVSS?
Oh, another acronym. Come on, Crob. Tell us what the acronym means.
The Common Vulnerability Scoring System?
What?
Yup.
5 points.
Enumeration?
Yup.
No enumeration on that one.
So
Clean it up.
that's a great question, and it leads us into another question of what is the CVE program not? Right. So in the beginning, I said that the CVE program is a dictionary, right? It defines the vulnerability and provides a unique identifying tag. There is another program called the NIST NVD program, the National Vulnerability Database. And that is, if you were to put these two next to each other, that is the encyclopedia. So the NIST NVD provides what's considered enriching information. So it's additional information about that vulnerability, including some links and some additional information like scoring. So technically speaking, vulnerabilities scores, CVSS scores, come from the NVD. So they come from a group of analysts that sit at NIST that I'm getting there, that provide that, look at that vulnerability, and provide the severity score. Now that severity score is in a vacuum and it does not give you impact. It gives you severity in a vacuum. So they're not the entire thing you need to look at, but that's a whole different sort of risk situation. Anyway, so the vendor in today's new CVE program, there is a spot for the vendor to issue the CVSS number, and the CVSS score is then flows through the CVE program into the NVD program, and the NVD program then looks at that score and says, yep, we agree with that. And so that kind of takes a little bit of the guesswork out of it and allows the vendor to provide a score. There's also another program that NIST and the CVE program are doing, where if you register with the NIST NVD program, you can basically kind of reach different levels of achievement, and NIST will just take your score as accurate without, they'll just trust you because you've kind of passed their certification sort of test. And I can't remember what that's called. I think it's called CVE mapping these days, but I can't remember exactly what that one's called. But yeah, does that answer your question? So CVSS, the score, is technically part of the NVD and not the CVE program.
And CVSS does not measure risk.
It does not. No.
Right. Well, yeah, we always discuss that. There is severity beyond scoring.
Correct.
We have a great episode on that topic.
Yes. So we talked about what the CVE program is not. So I just, before we go on, we keep talking about the numeration and giggling, haha. Can we talk about just the acronym that has that word in it so everybody could understand the difference a little bit?
You mean CWE, the Common Weakness Enumerator?
Yeah, not to be confused with CVE, which is why
W and V are totally different letters.
Yeah, but the
vulnerabilities aren't weaknesses, Lisa. You know that.
It's the E that's everybody screwing up, which is why we're now an acronym without describing the acronym.
Yeah, now it's just
only
a thing.
MITRE didn't sponsor both programs.
Yeah, they used to be connected too, and now they're not. CWE has an entire board. They are a full-fledged their own program. So kind of to understand CWE versus CVE, imagine that CVE is at a micro level. It's identifying specific vulnerabilities in products, whereas CWE is identifying classes of vulnerabilities. Right? Like privilege escalation is a kind of vulnerability. That would be a CWE versus a CVE, which is, a specific vulnerability that falls under that umbrella in that bucket, if you will. That's the difference between CWE and CVE.
The way I always thought about it, CVE tells you kind of what the problem is. Like, hey, there's this problem. CWE described how that problem happened. And CVSS describes how that problem works.
Yeah,
oh, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. So I feel like so how long has the CVE program been around? You said
1999.
Yeah, we just had a big anniversary, although we couldn't celebrate it.
What's
Maybe
it doing in
soon.
1999? That's a question, isn't it? I think I was in high school.
I was
I was
graduating.
getting ready for Y2K.
I was graduating college. I graduated
All the
college
computers
that
were going
year.
to stop in 2000s. We had to prepare. You're
You're
all
right.
welcome.
I have to tell you, I did join a big corporation right before 2000, and I remember us freaking out about it. Yeah, you're right about
It's
that.
all going to stop.
Yeah. So Katie, can you give us a little history of the path and the timeline now that
Yeah.
it's been so long?
So CVE program was created officially in 1999, and then it sort of bloomed from there. So the board was created. So the CVE board exists. There are about 20 people on the CVE board. I am on the CVE board, hence I'm talking about this. And then kind of
Go,
flash,
Katie.
yeah, sort of flash forward about, I don't know, maybe 10 years or so to 2010-ish. The program started kind of, there were ups and downs, and all the vulnerabilities kind of had to go through the CVE board in order to be published, right? So obviously CVE was approved by the CVE board. And as you can imagine, there was a huge backlog. So in
Sounds
2000,
super efficient.
yeah. So in 2016, there was a pretty mighty change that happened. And that is really when we started. CNAs had always kind of existed, but they were not what's considered authorized data publishers. So authorized data publisher, another term, is an organization that has the rights to publish to the CVE master list. So CNAs existed, but they...
Wait,
Go ahead.
sorry to interrupt you there, but authorized data publisher, is that an old term? Is it still used today, or is
It's
it
still used today? Yeah.
okay?
Yeah. So authorized data publishers are organizations like the NIST NVD program can publish directly to the CVE list for data cleanup purposes, right? So there's still authorized data publishers that are not CNAs, but in 2016, the CVE program underwent this pretty massive change, right? And they got a new board, they got a new director, program manager. That program manager came in and said, "How are we doing this?" And one of my favorite stories that he tells is that he asked, "How are we doing this?" And they printed off this chart, the slide, kind of like flow chart of how a CVE is published. And he said he could take it and hang it on the walls. And there were like just
walls all the way around, right?
Of all of it. He was like, "This is too much. We need to simplify
the flow chart
this."
was ridiculous.
Right. We need
Off
to simplify
the chart
this.
flow chart.
Yeah. And so the decision was made 2016, 2017 to onboard CNAs, and that the idea of the CVE program, one of the primary goals is more CVEs faster. You're never going to be able to get all of the CVEs ever, because CVE master list does not represent all of the CVEs that have ever been found, right? It only represents the ones that have been identified and cataloged. So there are vulnerabilities that exist that people don't know about, 0-day vulnerabilities that still exist in your 0-dayness. And there's an infinite number of vulnerabilities out there. And a CVE is not a measure of how good or how bad your organization is. Like, there's this kind of misconception that if you have more CVEs assigned to your organization, then you must not have good product security. And that is just not true at all. In fact, I would argue that if you have more CVEs,
it could be that you're actually having good SDL practices right now and kicking some butt and finding some things, because in the past, when code was created like 20 years ago, we didn't know about these things. We just coded like, hey, let's just do this,
Right,
and
exactly.
made it work. And now we're like, we're going to make sure that people can't break it.
Right.
So I don't have
it's actually
any
an indicator of
CVEs.
maturity. You don't have Crob?
If I have
I
zero
think so
CVEs,
too.
am
I
great?
believe, I think it's a bell
No.
curve. It goes up and then it starts to go like this. That's how I like to think about it.
Yeah, but in a vacuum, CVEs are not an indication of how good or bad your product security are, and they should not be treated
Completely
that way at all. So going back to the history again, so you have this big change that happened in 2016, 2017, started onboarding CNAs. So getting CNAs, training CNAs, this is what we want these organizations to do, and really kind of asking the community to participate in a more active way. And the decision was made, the reason this was done, the decision was made that in order to gain trust, you have to give trust, right? So this idea that only the CVE program is capable of writing a perfect, description, that's just not true, right? So the CNAs are in a much better place to be able to really provide that enriched information about that product vulnerability. So why not say, hey, you organization out there, vendor, if you would like to participate in the CVE program as a CNA, you can go through this training and we'll teach you how the services work. We'll teach you how to actually publish to the master list, and then you just publish, right? And we trust you to do that. And that's the way that the program currently stands. So we've onboarded, we're now at 161 organizations all around the world. So it's a multinational organization. It exists all over the world. There's some specific statistics on how many countries, but I can't quite remember off the top of my head. But there is a huge uptick in CNAs, and what the goal of the program is to onboard more CNAs, right? You want more coverage because we want to enable the transparency and enable the ability for the customer, the people at the end of the day, to be able to make that risk-based decision. And they need to be able to understand what issues exist within their systems so that they can make that decision, right? So that's sort of the idea behind that. So that was really the big change after 2017. You saw a lot of increased CNAs, and then there's also the CVE working groups. So there are 5 big CVE working groups that most of them exist and are open to the public. Anyone can join as long as you want to participate. Go ahead, Josh, you had a question.
One thing I wanted to point out though is that as the CVE program has evolved, I think they've provided a lot of support to the CNAs as the number of CNAs have grown. There's been more participation from the CNAs to help guide the program itself, right? At least, especially in the way of documenting or helping the CNAs understand how to formulate the CVEs that they're about to publish, because they wanted some consistency in the program, right?
Yep, standardization and consistency. And the idea that this is a community program and that there are many stakeholders and they come in multiple different fashions. To me, so twice a year, there is a CNA summit. And that is the opportunity for all of the active participants, the CNAs, to come and talk about the different issues and to communicate those issues to the MITRE CVE program, the board of directors, and the secretariat function. So I've seen a lot of really awesome initiatives that come out of those CNA summits. A lot of very long conversations about CVE numbering and how we're going to stick to this standard and why the number is 2019 versus 2020. And oh man, very, very, very powerful, very embroiled
And a
conversations
lot of good
about it.
a lot of good friendships that came out of it. That's how Katie and I met, was through that meeting.
Yep.
I always like, as a participant, I always do feel like my voice has always been valued. And I do see the maturity. I mean, I get it. When you first start something like the CNA and the CNA program, right? It's sort of like you're going to hold it like this in the beginning, just to make sure you're controlling, you're understanding what's going on. And then the more you learn and the more you start to trust, and you start to trust the program, then the easier it is to become one and to know what rules to follow, because other people have learned and grown the program with it. So I have seen that strength in it and that growth in it and the maturity in it. And it's been quite impressive. And like you said, there's all these working groups that are working on things to automate it more so that a company doesn't have to manually start doing things, even if they are a CNA. I see automation as one of the working groups, automation working group.
Yep. So there are 5 working groups, but go ahead, Crob.
Go ahead. Sorry. Of course, I butted in front of you.
I'm used to it. So I was wondering if I find a vulnerability and I'm not using CVE, how can people understand what the hell's going on? How do you share that around the globe? Are there any other similar standards, or how does it my whole life in operations and then working as a vendor, CVE was the core of everything. That's how all my business processes kind of rotated around. both as a customer and as a supplier. Does Europe have its own version of CVE? God, I hope not.
So there are other country versions.
No offense, Europe.
CVE. China does have a CVE-ish program, but it also scrapes CVE, so the core of its program is still CVE. And there are a couple paid for subscription services as well. But I think what you're asking is, if you were a researcher and you find a vulnerability,
how does it work?
How do you get a CVE?
How do you articulate
right?
what the hell you have?
Yeah. So in the event, so the CNAs, we talked about that kind of perspective, and that's if a vendor knows about a vulnerability. So as a researcher, if you find a vulnerability, you can go to that vendor that owns that product and say, hey, I found this vulnerability. If they have a vulnerability disclosure program, in some cases they have a bug bounty program, and they will pay you for that vulnerability. If they don't have either of those and they're not a CNA, there are other avenues for you to get the credit and the recognition that comes with that CVE, and just making sure that the CVE is documented, right? I know that's a lot of researchers have they just want to make sure it's documented, right? So you can go to other organizations as well. So you can go to CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. They are a CNA and can issue CVEs in products where a CNA does not already exist, right? Or CertCC through Carnegie Mellon, the SCI, they are a CNA, they can issue CVEs. ICS Cert is another one, can issue CVEs. Rapid7 is another one. GitHub is another, if you happen to find stuff in open source. Open source is a little trickier. Open source is very tricky because, yeah, so those are avenues. And the other option is you can go directly to MITRE. MITRE has, if you go on the MITRE website, the CVE website, you can submit a vulnerability. And now they're going to ask you, if there was a vendor already that is a CNA, right? Say a big company, they're going to ask, did you already talk to these people? And is there a dispute here? And if there's a dispute here, then there's a different process that needs to be followed. If there is not a dispute, then, and that just happens to be in a product that company is just not a CNA, which there are a lot of companies that are not CNAs, then MITRE can issue the CVE. As easy as that.
So, Katie, I feel like in our past, we've had maybe some haters of the program. Should we go there?
That's just you, Lisa.
It wasn't me. No, I
don't know, Lisa. That's how we met.
I didn't hate the program.
Wow, everybody's origin story with Lisa starts in hate.
Yeah, sorry, I don't.
Yelling.
Yeah, thanks. I don't believe in assigning CVEs for code that's already in end of security support or end of life, because that just seems ridiculous to me. But that's a whole nother story, and that's how I met Katie. But in general, I do feel like there is I'm really happy with the program. I'm happy to be in control of my CVEs. I'm happy with how the MITRE has been trying to make it easier and easier, and having these automation ways for me to automate activating my CVEs and etc. So I am not a hater, but I have felt like in the past there have been some haters, maybe because my personal opinion is that all of a sudden we went and exponentially grew of how many CVEs that we needed, because not only were industries themselves who already did CVEs were maturing their practices, but others who weren't doing CVEs all of a sudden realized that this is the way to go. So Can you explain that history just a little bit without, pissing off too many people?
No, so you're absolutely right on the money there. And I will give you a statistic to make it a little bit more palpable even. In 2016, there were 6,457 CVEs issued. In 2017, there were 14,644 CVEs issued. There were more than twice as many issued in 2017 when the CNAs started than there were in 2016, right? So there were legitimate problems. And there still are some problems. And so I hesitate when we say, there are some people who just don't like the CVE program. I think that there are some people who just have, feelings, and there's nothing I can do about it. But there were legitimate problems, and there are still legitimate problems. And when you have a program that's as big as the CVE program, covers as many different facets and as many different organizations as the CVE program, sometimes unpopular decisions are made. And that's for the good of the community. But unfortunately, the nature of compromise means that if one person is 80% happy, they're still 20% unhappy. And that's difficult. Go ahead. I think Josh had a question first, though.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's a question or more of a point, but I've always found any program that's industry driven like this, and it's supporting a wider industry, has always got hiccups and bumps in the road as it matures.
Compromise.
Yeah, and there's a need for compromise, and there's a need to look beyond just the individual needs of a company. And I think even the points that Lisa brought up were really relevant, right? There was a discussion and a debate about whether or not to create CVEs for products that had been end of life. And there were strong feelings on either side of that. But I think the whole point of this, though, was that it was a collaborative, endeavor, right? It was not a dictatorship where MITRE and the CVE program said, thou shalt do it this way. There were rules and guidelines that were put in place in order to help the industry continue down a safe path, but it was not to a point where there was no communication and no attempt to help build a stronger relationship between the community. And over time, this got better and better and better. And like to your point, right, today, there's always going to be problems as we evolve, right? But I think that, I even in the case that Lisa brought up, which I agree with, I think there needs to be that constant collaborative communication so that we are always working to meet the needs of the industry, right? And I think the CVE program has done that.
Yeah. Go ahead,
So
Crob.
I had a question.
Mhm.
I don't do anything, but we've got people on the call that are industry people that do things. So how can industry people kind of help the program, whether they are CNAs or not? So if you're a vendor and you've got a product security team, how can I help out? And again, I don't do a damn thing. I just talk. But there are people on this call and people that listen that actually have influence. So how can they help out?
Yeah, so there are 5 working groups. Like I said, there's the strategic planning working group. So that is open to anybody if you'd like to join and participate in that. It is a very strategically focused kind of, it looks at the goals and objectives of the CVE program in the future. So it's kind of a philosophical discussion. So be prepared for that. It is my favorite working group, just because I think
I
that
was
we get
going to
everything.
ask you which one was your favorite, but I didn't know if you were going to tell me. But I so was going to ask that, and you just said it.
The strategic
Cool.
planning working group is my favorite, because I really enjoy the philosophical kind of conversations and the really forcing your mind into a place that is uncomfortable, because you have to look ahead, right? So if we were to stick in the current day and just try to make CVEs faster and better, we would just end up with a faster and better horse, I believe is what Ford Motor Company said, that if they asked the public, what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, and we never would have had the car. So the strategic working group, they really try to look at the program and define and help identify and really accomplish those tasks and objectives that help the program grow to meet the goals of more CVEs, faster, better coverage, and better support services to the community. But it can get real philosophical, I will warn you up front. And a very heated conversation sometimes. It can be very emotional. The next one is the automation working group. Yeah, all the feels. And the next one is the automation working group. So the automation working group, one of the things they do, it's in the name, is they are trying to institute services that help the CNAs automate and make the CVE program faster and better and more responsive to the CNAs. So they do some infrastructure services and are building and trying to develop new, better ways of making sure that the automation is in place to help the CNAs do their job quicker and easier and cheaper. There's the quality working group. So the quality working group does, its main objective is to make sure that quality is upheld while they are doing all of these other things. So they look at things like the JSON format and how to improve the processes and how to make sure that quality is being delivered to the customer at every stage. The next one is the OCWG, the Outreach Working Group. So that one is all about how to build that training, build the outreach to the CNAs to make sure that the CNAs are receiving the kind of training and onboarding and support that they need. But it also helps overall with the outreach of the program to make sure that the message is being communicated to the stakeholders who maybe are not CNAs outside of the program. So there are a lot of stakeholders in this game that you wouldn't actually think about. And I'm going to get to one other question in a second when I ask Crob a question. I know it's coming. Yeah, and then the final one is the CNA working group. So the CNA working group is really the only working group that's a closed working group. So you have to be a CNA in order to take part in that. They meet in almost every time zone. I feel like these days they meet every 2 weeks, and I think their main mission is really to be that voice of the CNAs. So they listen to and act for the CNAs. There is a person who runs the CNA working group called Todd Beardsley. He is my absolute hero. If you've never met him, he is delightful. And he is a honorary board member. He sits on what's called the CNA liaison position on the board of directors. So he represents the will of the CNAs. So those are the working groups and how people can get involved. There are a couple other things that people can do. So right now, the CVE program is actively trying to get out and reach people and understand what some of the challenges are, understand what's working and what's not working. So there are basically Twitter feeds, there are LinkedIn feeds, there are blog posts, some of that information. If it's working, let us know. If it's not, then let us know. If it's working and you like it as a CNA, then share that information, or write your own blog post about how the CVE program helps you. All of that advocacy is really, really helpful because the CVE program is not free. It is supported and funded by federal funding, actually, through.
So we should all take advantage of it.
Yeah, but the problem is that federal funding is not always. We want it to be there all the time, but it's not always
guaranteed.
The case. It's not guaranteed.
So Katie, yeah. I'm curious. I know that we just a lot's going on with the executive order that's coming out, and we still have to learn a lot. But I would assume that with the executive order and the implications that we need to have a vulnerability disclosure program, a VDP, that this might come into play. I mean, in order to have a proper VDP, you need to be able to properly disclose about your issues and then properly identify them. So, I mean, I don't know how much you're into knowing that side now that you're, in a different world, but I really do hope that they get the funding because of that, because without the CVE program or the CNA program, we wouldn't be able to do the VDP successfully. So
yeah,
I'm hopeful for that.
I do want to highlight that the CVE program is very well sponsored, right? The chances that it just ends is just not likely at all, and the chances that funding goes away is also just not likely at all. But there have been years where the MITRE program has basically paid out of overhead to continue to run the program. Because it was not funded well. And in fact, you can go back and read in 2018, there was a House Energy and Commerce report, which talks about the CVE program and how it was funded. I had to go personally answer to the House Energy and Commerce Committee on the CVE program and how it was run. So in the past,
that sounds great.
it was
Yeah, it's like, don't question it. Like, it's working, it's great. Let's go, let's support it.
Yeah, but the thing is that, this
Lisa's view.
is a public program for the public good, and with that there should also be accountability. And so I don't
Transparency, yeah.
discount that that effort
Yep.
on behalf of Congress to make sure that the program is transparent and is accountable. And what we talked about then in 2018 is kind of the same sort of things that we've talked about now, is that in 2016 there were problems. And that steps are still being taken to mitigate those problems. So most of the issues that exist in 2016 are gone, but we could still make the program better. And some of the programs that were instituted in 2016, 2017 are now coming to fruition. So things like that, automation services.
I was in 2016.
Yeah, the new website, the CVE rules, those things they've been in the works for a long time. Yeah.
Right. As I look at this, when I think of, because I'm completely focused on the executive order, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think about I have to start my FY 23 strategy planning. And one of the things I've been thinking about is to making sure that I have enough of my team to do that industry outreach to help support these other groups, because without these groups, like within First or come on, Crob, or in
you
CVE,
don't have enough people and you aren't supporting enough.
I have enough people, I feel like. I mean, I could always use more, of course. But in general, no, I'm thinking about the fact that, like, the reason why we're successful is because we have these supportive groups around us. And are we contributing to them enough to keep them going for all the value we're getting out of? So it's one of the things that's on the top of my mind. And I was drafting an email while we were talking here, because I feel like there's more that we could do, and there's other people probably out there like me that could do more.
And I have to say, from my experience, I said it before, CVE is foundational to virtually every enterprise security process. The fact that I have to manage vulnerabilities. How do I manage vulnerabilities? Do I just go around and randomly do stuff? Or do we have an actual list of things that happened that people know about and they've reported, hopefully, how to fix? But then as a vendor, it's critical to communicate. How does my organization talk to your organization, Lisa? Hey, Lisa, right. We have this thing. Is it this thing? No. It's something different. Is it this other thing? No.
And your org does talk to mine a lot, and I need to know that thing so then I can represent that thing so then my customers, who are in essence your customers, already know what that thing is, and then I address the thing that you were talking about. That
chain of understanding and trust. We know what this issue is, and it might be different in my company versus your company versus a third company, but at least we know this is the vulnerability, this is the problem, and how that your vendor responds is different. That's just bedrock. In America, it's mom and apple pie. That is the core of a product security program.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you.
Yep. I completely agree.
I said, Crob, I was going to ask a question to you because you guys are interviewing me, but I was going to ask you a question, and that's, you used to work at some interesting organizations, and what was the impact of the CVE program to, say, the financial industry, and what would happen if it didn't exist?
So the PCI Council, the payment cards industry, so every credit card company on the globe makes rules. And if you are an organization that takes these credit cards or is involved in processing on some level, there's rules you have to follow. And in the PCI rules, it says, you must address vulnerabilities, based off of certain levels of CVSS. So without that understanding of what these vulnerabilities were, like the FSI system would be, you would have very little trust in the banking and your investment ecosystem if you weren't able to have this solid understanding of there was this problem and it got fixed.
But it's not just
critical to that.
Yeah, but it's not just with the financial industry, right? It's
that's just one example.
Yeah, right. No, but you're right. Yeah, I think it's every vendor, every company that produces a product has has a way to build trust with their customers. It's not even just about making them accountable, but building trust with their customers by demonstrating that they're cataloging and following an industry practice around identifying vulnerabilities.
Even thinking about the customer, the people that we are all accountable to, our customers, they have requirements. There are laws and regulations and rules, depending on kind of what they are and what they do. It's different words, but at the TLDR, whether you're a hospital or you're a bank or you're a Marine fire base in Kyrgyzstan, there are certain rules you have to follow. And one of those rules is you must fix vulnerabilities. And without that common language, it's chaos.
It all breaks down.
I think,
you're randomly throwing
I agree.
paint on the wall.
I think, Josh, you said it. The catalog and that it shows maturity when you can catalog it. And I have to tell you, since open source, component management is so hard for a lot of companies.
So easy.
Come on, Crob, it's hard.
It's fucking easy. You're not doing it right.
Okay, you're swearing. We gotta now make it R-rated. Okay, for those companies that utilize tools with their open source component management, having a CVE is a way to have those tools easily identify those vulnerabilities in the things that you consume. If you don't have a CVE, it's very difficult to find those issues and to be able to tell those people that consume it that there's a vulnerability to address, especially because in a bigger company, you need automation and tooling to be able to handle the tens of thousands of open sources being used. So it's another blessing. And I'm going to say my last
so much software.
Hey, it's not stealing, open source. Come on, hun. So the last thing that I'm going to say is my biggest, the time that I really realized that having a CVE was so important was during Heartbleed. I was in a big company. There was a lot of products that were affected because they consumed OpenSSL. And my customers were calling over and over again. And if we didn't have that common ID for them to look at within my security, it was my bulletins, advisories, we would have had more and more calls. And at that time, the company I was at said that it cost $40,000 every time a customer called into support. So yeah, I know it's a little ridiculous. Well, I didn't do customer support, but anyways, I was able to reduce that because I had an identification number. So I am very thankful for the program. Katie, I'm thankful for all the support that you have given it and the passion you've given it. And I will always be there to support you with the program. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I think with that, I would encourage everybody to support the program and not take it for granted. While the funding is there and we're getting great support from the industry, there can always be more. So let's thank the people that are putting their hearts in this and helping us to identify and catalog vulnerabilities. So with that, everybody, thank you. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the week.